Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Beaver and today we are making my favorite rum recipe. So let's get into it. Now before we get into the whole recipe making things, we're going to pop over to past Beaver. He's quickly going to explain what we did and how we got to this point and why I say this is my favorite rum recipe. So yeah, let's quickly pop back over to past Beaver. He's gonna run us through the recipe. Past Beaver here, future Beaver probably kicked back to me now and said I need to go through the recipe that we're going to be using today. So the recipe we're going to be using is a super simple recipe for my favorite rum, and all the ingredients I picked up on my way home at a couple of grocery stores, so you should be able to pick it up as well. So let's quickly get into the recipe, jump down and go through all the ingredients. But remember, stick around till the end, because during the distillation we're going to do a couple of interesting things to the actual recipe, and we're not just going to be making my favorite rum, but we're also going to be adding a couple of secret ingredients during distillation so we can get those flavors that we want. Because keep in mind, this is going to be a beautiful white rum that also lends itself well for you to be able to dump it into a barrel or age it on a couple of staves, and it has a fantastic profile that the wood will bring out as well if you want to age your rum. So yeah, let's quickly jump down, get into the video, and then I'll see you guys when we make the ingredients. So first up, for the ingredients, we are using standard brown sugar, and when you are making a rum, always check at the bottom of the package. Here in South Africa it says 100% pure cane sugar. We're also going to be using some treacle sugar, once again pure cane sugar, as well as some Blackstrap molasses and some sweet molasses. Now let's quickly get into the actual recipe and how all of these components are go together. And remember, this recipe is fully scalable. We can make it smaller, we can make it larger, and this recipe here is for a 10-liter batch. The full recipe will be down in the description as well as on the website, and I'll put a link to it down at the bottom. So the first part of this recipe is we're going to start with roughly about 1.5 liters of water. Now this is not very important how much water you put in. It's just going to be enough to actually melt the sugars, to dissolve all the sugars into a solution, so we can actually control that all the sugars are dissolved, as well as once we are done with dissolving the sugars, we're also going to invert those sugars. So we don't want that very sugar ball flavor to overpower the nice delicate rum flavors we're going to get. So first up, let's get some water into our pot and boil it up and get our sugars all dissolved. So to this we are going to be adding our whole packet of treacle sugar. Now this is 750 grams of treacle sugar. Now the treacle sugar, because I can't get Treacle 3, which is the lightest version of the molasses, I'm going for the treacle sugar. So this has that nice delicate molasses flavor that you expect in a nice white rum. So let's quickly get this cut open and then into our pot. Next up, our standard brown sugar. Now this is the reason why we want to invert our sugars, because we're going to be using some of this brown sugar as well. Not the whole packet, about half the packet should do. Okay, so while we wait for the pot to get up to a boil, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn on a kettle and get my molasses into some hot water so we can get that molasses to start melting, and it will make it a super ton easier to get it out of the containers and into our fermenter. So with a fair amount of molasses spilled all over the camera, it's now time for us to dump our nice hot sugary liquid into our bottle. Now ensure that it is cooled down enough to do this. You don't want to dump super hot stuff into this bottle if you're going to be using your standard plastic bottle that is fermenter safe. So this is graded for food grade, so you don't want to dump super hot stuff in there. It is going to shrink up the bottle. So yeah, just be careful, test your temperature before you dump it in, and yeah, rather give it a little bit longer before you dump it in. But yeah, that has now gotten enough time to cool down. Let's quickly get it into our fermenter. So it's time to pitch our yeast. Now the yeast we'll be using is our standard brandy yeast. So I got one packet of brandy yeast. I've just dissolved it in water just to let it rehydrate a little bit. Just to let it rehydrate a little bit. I do not want it to bloom yet. The reason for that is I want it to bloom inside of the fermenter, and I don't want it to give off any funky flavors while blooming with just water. So I'm just dissolving it, stirring it around up until I see all the granules dissolving, and then yeah, we're just going to pitch it straight into the fermenter. The reason why I want to dissolve it in water first is quite simply I don't want a thermal shock by just dumping the powder in. By allowing it to come up to roughly room temperature, which the water in that jug was, it's capable of not having as much shock when it goes straight into the liquid. Now that Past Beaver has run us through the recipe, what we're going to do now is a couple of fun tricks, because we're not just going to distill this in the normal way. We're actually going to be doing a couple of things to this rum just to bump the flavor up and do the things that make it my favorite rum. Not only because there's 3 different types of molasses and sugar in that, and it's all pure cane sugar, so you better guess that it is a proper rum. We're also going to do a couple of funny things during distillation. So the first step that we're going to do is we're going to do a run and a half. So we're going to be using our mini pot still over here. There we go, our mini pot still over there. We're going to be using that mini pot still to actually do the run. And then what we're going to do is with the run and a half, we're going to actually bump the flavor. So if you don't know what a run and a half is, it's where we do a stripping run of half of the batch. In this case, we're going to do a stripping run of 9 liters of the original 10-liter wash. We're going to keep 1 liter aside, and then we're going to take those low ones and dump them back into the still and redistill them in a run and a half. But yeah, let's quickly get the wash in there, get our 1 liter off to the side, and I'll see you guys back once we are taking first drips of our stripping run. So see you guys then. Okay, so we have the wash in the still has heated up, and we're busy doing a stripping run now. So let me quickly explain what a stripping run is. So a stripping run is quite simply put when we run our still as fast as we can with as much heat going into it as possible, as long as our condenser, now this is the condenser here, this has cold water running through it, cooling down the vapor that comes from the top there all the way down. So as long as there's enough energy from the water to cool down that vapor and turn it back into liquid, and the liquid coming out of the bottom is nice and cool, we can call that a stripping run. Now if you stuck around this far in the video, thank you very much. But now comes the interesting part. Up until now, all we did is we made the wash and we did a stripping run. Now after the stripping run, as you can see here, we have a bottle filled with some orange liquid. Now remember that 1 liter we kept aside. Now that's roughly about 10% of the wash. You can go a little bit more, but try and keep it under 20% from the experiments I've done. Now the reason why this is my favorite rum is for a couple of reasons. Number one is the 3 different types of molasses that we have in the run, as well as the way we're going to distill it. Now, part number 1 of the distillation is once you're done with your stripping run, remember in the stripping run we didn't do any cuts, we did nothing at all. All we did is we stripped as much alcohol out of the wash as we could. Then we take that and we decant it into a vessel that's large enough to keep the complete stripping run as well as that part of the wash that you kept one side. Then we mix the two together and we leave it for a minimum of 1 week. What's going to happen is, I'm not 100% sure what the chemical reaction is. If anybody knows, put it down in the comment section. But when you add that wash into the stripping run, something happens to the flavors of the run. Now I accidentally came across this when I did a rum run, and I ended up putting everything back together to do the run, and then ESCOM happened and I couldn't do the run and left it for a couple of days, and I found that the flavor changed between the 2 runs. And I then started experimenting to leave it for a couple days and then carried on, and I found after about 5 days the flavor change is quite significant when you add the wash into the stripping run and leave it just to mellow out and combine over a period of time. I think it's very similar to when they add a high proof liquor into a wine to make it like a port wine. So yeah, this process is amazing. So if you ever want to try it, yeah, and if you have tried it, put it down in the comment section on what you found the flavor changes to be. For me, it brings out a lot of those caramel notes, as well as it softens the molasses hit that you normally get from a rum. So yeah, after doing this, it made a big difference to it. But what we're going to do now is we're going to decant this into our still, and while that is heating up, we're going to prepare some of our spices that we're going to be placing in the column to infuse with vapor. So stick around for that. Let's quickly get this into the still, get the still heating up so we can prepare our spices. Now for the spices that we're going to be infusing into our rum, I like my rum to have a little bit of an anisey hit, so more of that licorice type of flavor. So for that, I went out and I got some star anise. Now the star anise is going to add beautiful flavor to this, and we're going to be using about 1.5 cloves of the star anise. So we're going to be using like the little star anise nibs, but we're going to be using 1 as well as half a 1. We'll be just going to snap off the little fingers, and then we have 2 little pieces of star anise that we're going to be putting into a cotton cloth that we're going to be suspending from the column. The next part that we're going to be adding is some cinnamon. Now the cinnamon, try not to get the ground cinnamon, the fine powdery stuff. Try and get the sticks. Now these sticks have a fantastic cinnamon flavor, but they do pack a hell of a punch. So use a lot less than you think. Now if you don't like cinnamon or that little bit of heat that cinnamon gives, don't put it in. But for me, it just adds a little bit of depth of flavor to the rum. But we're going to use a very small amount of it just to bump that flavor up just a tiny bit. So how much of this are we going to use? We're only going to be cracking off a tiny piece of it. So it's about roughly about a tablespoon worth of chips. Okay, don't fill up the tablespoon, don't make it any looser. We're just going to be a little bit of cinnamon just to add that little depth of flavor that the rum might be lacking. And then last but not least, some fresh ginger. Now this ginger is going to give it a beautiful depth of flavor. So what we're going to do with the ginger is we're just going to cut thin slivers off of this. We're going to leave the skin on, and then we're going to put everything into our little cotton cloth, tie it up and tie it into the column of the still. So we're going to hook it onto our line arm coming down. We're going to hook it on the inside, and it's just going to be suspended in the column here during the run, and that's going to infuse some beautiful flavors that might be lacking in this rum. Now you can play around with this with all the different types of spices that you want, and add those little flavors that are missing to the rum. But I would suggest first just do the rum run as it is, see what flavors are there for you, and then add the ones that you want to add. You can play around with the spices and add it that way. So yeah, let's quickly get the ginger cut up into the cloth and hang our cloth inside of this column, because that still heats up quite quickly with that propane burner at the bottom. So we're going to be using about a knob, about a finger thumb size piece of the ginger. That smells lovely. Once again, don't get the ground stuff or the powdered ginger. That is just gonna mess with the flavor. You want that fresh ginger flavor. You don't want the ground ginger flavor. So you want the nice fresh ginger flavor. Once everything is about this size, I'm just going to add it into our little bag. We are then going to just tie up the bag so none of that stuff falls into the liquid. We don't want it to touch the liquid. It's not going to be a maceration, it's going to be an infusion. If you macerate it, it's going to change the flavor profile. So find a way to suspend it within your column or in your head of your still. You do not want to macerate it. It's going to change the flavor profile completely. So I want fresh, vibrant flavors. I don't want that macerated flavors in this rum. So yeah, let's get it suspended, get our cap on to our still, and I'll see you guys during first drips. Just want to pop in here real quick, just with a little bit of a caution. If you're going to suspend something within your column or within your line arm or whatever, make sure you do not block it. You want all the vapor, everything to pass by relatively easily, because if you create a blockage, you might just cause back pressure into your still or any funny stuff to happen. Or if you shut down your still and everything settles down and it creates like a plug, it's going to create a vacuum, and that's where you see those photos of people having collapsed stills. So if you're going to suspend something, ensure that you have more than enough room around it, or the material that you put in there, the spices and all that other stuff, has enough breathing room through it, even when it gets nice and soggy, to not clog your column or your line arm. Please guys, that will just be a very bad day. Now that said, let's get my little baggie into my column. Okay, now that we started getting first drips coming off the still, we're just going to do our 4 shots cut, and then we're going to transition into our heads cut. 4 shots, heads, and then we're going to transition into hearts. And I'm just going to sit here and taste it, and I will then give you guys feedback. Once the whole run is done, I'll do the cuts in small jars so we can go through the transition of flavors, and I'll explain which cuts I like to keep and which cuts I like to discard. So yeah, I'll see you guys once we are done. Now for this run, we're going to be taking it extremely slowly. We're not going to rush through this. We want small slow drips coming off the still, and we want to take it off nice and slow. The slower you're going to go, the better the flavors are going to develop. So this is not going to be a fast and quick run. This is just going to be a nice and slow run. So take your time with it, sit with your still, and taste those flavors as they're coming off the still. Now I'll see you guys back once this is done. Now that the run is done and we managed to collect all of our jars, it's time for us to give everyone a quick taste and then just move through all of the jars, trying not to blow out our palate, and then judge which ones are going to stay behind. So let me just quickly run through the jars, dump our keeps into our keeps jar, proof it down, and then I'll see you guys back as soon as I can give you some feedback on the flavors that as they go through and what you need to be looking for when you do this kind of run. So yeah, let me just quickly run through all of these and then I'll see you guys in a couple of minutes. Okay, so all blended back together, we're looking at an ABV of around about 73%. So yeah, quite a good run. We have just under 1 liter of product that we can now proof down, and we're gonna proof it down to about 40%. Gonna shoot for about 45, and then yeah, let's give it one final taste. Just a couple of quick notes. It started off nice and sweet, then it went into the clovey kind of star anise-y licoricey flavors, and then transitioned over into the ginger, and then right at the end you got a little bit of cinnamon. As you saw in jar number 7, I didn't add all the cut. There was a little bit too much of the cinnamon coming in on that side there, and it kind of started making a little bit of a funky flavor. And then our very last jar, I didn't add any because yeah, it started smelling a little bit of tails. Not a lot, just a hint of tails started coming in, so that was a no-go. As well as with jar number 1, that is after our 4 shots and heads cuts. Jar number 1, I didn't think to add all of it. Maybe once I've done proofing it down, maybe I'll add some more of this sweet caramelly flavor into it. So yeah, we'll proof it down quickly and I'll see you guys in a minute. Now unfortunately I don't have any of your fancy tasting glasses here in this mini studio I've got going on this side, but I do have one of my cut jars. Smells of nothing, so let's quickly give this stuff a taste. So right off the bat you get hit by that star anise licorice smell. Then that transitions into a nice sweet caramel. And right at the end there you get a little bit of the ginger. As for the flavor, it's sweet. It has a little bit of that nice deep rich rum flavors going on with the caramels and the molasses and all that, almost like a Wilson toffee. And then you get hit with that floral star anise flavor, little bit of the cinnamon coming in, just enough to heat up your palate. It doesn't have any alcohol bite on it. So you have the caramels, you have the chocolates, you have all those lovely flavors that I shoot for when I make a rum. You get a little bit of the fruitiness from the molasses, as well as that time that the alcohol or the stripping run and the wash spent melding together. Gives you these nice fruity, I'm not going to say rotten fruit, but overripe fruit kind of smells. And don't take that in a bad way. It's though when you open up a bag of like fruit preserved fruit in that. You get that nice overripe fruit smell. So yeah, this is an awesome rum. I really would suggest that you try and make this yourself, but start off by just trying that one little trick that I showed you, where you add the wash into the end product, or not to the end product, where you add the wash into the stripping run, leave it for a couple of days, and then do your run. So yeah, if you stuck around this far, thank you very much for watching, and have a lekker day.